My daughter married a wealthy Chinese man and cut me off. Mom, they hate poverty and you're just a waitress. Then her mother-in-law came to my workplace to mock me. Serve me in my language and I'll give you $100,000. She laughed. What I said in perfect Chinese shocked them. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like and subscribe button. Let me take you back to how this nightmare began. Because honey, you're going to want to know exactly how a 50-year-old waitress ended up speaking fluent Chinese to a billionaire's mother while serving overpriced salmon at Romano's restaurant. 3 hours earlier, I'd been wiping down table 12 for the third time that shift, my lower back aching in that special way that comes from 7 years of carrying heavy trays and fake smiles. The lunch rush had been brutal. A combination of demanding tourists and local business types who treated servers like furniture that occasionally brought food. Linda, you've got a party of 8 requesting table 15, Marcus called from behind the bar, his tone suggesting this wasn't going to be a pleasant evening. High-maintenance types, big spenders, but they'll make you work for every penny. Table 15 was in my section, tucked in the corner where the restaurant's important guests preferred to conduct their private conversations. I'd served politicians, celebrities, and enough self-important millionaires to recognize the type immediately, but nothing had prepared me for what walked through Romano's doors at exactly 7:30 that evening. Jessica entered first, her designer dress probably costing more than I made in 3 months. Behind her walked a man I assumed was her new husband. Tall, impeccably dressed, with the kind of confidence that came from never having to check a bank balance. But it was the older woman who commanded attention, perfectly coiffed silver hair, jewelry that caught the light with every movement and an air of authority that made seasoned businessmen step aside. Mrs. Helen Chun had arrived to destroy my daughter's marriage, though none of us knew it yet. I watched from behind the wine station as they were seated, my heart doing something between pride and worry as I observed Jessica playing the perfect daughter-in-law. She'd always been good at adapting to situations, a skill I'd thought would serve her well in life. I'd been wrong about so many things. The Chun family filled the remaining chairs. Aunts, uncles, cousins, all speaking in rapid Mandarin, while Jessica smiled politely, clearly not understanding a word. Kevin, her husband, translated occasionally, but I noticed how his family's conversation would pause whenever he did, as if they were discussing things she wasn't meant to hear. 20 minutes into their meal, Mrs. Chun raised her hand and called out, "Waitress." Her voice carried the tone of someone accustomed to immediate obedience. I approached their table with my professional smile firmly in place. Notepad ready. "Good evening, folks. How can I help you?" Mrs. Chun looked at me with the kind of dismissive glance usually reserved for insects. "We need more water, and the salmon is overcooked. Also, this wine selection is inadequate for a restaurant claiming to serve fine dining." I nodded politely. "I'll speak with the kitchen about the salmon and have our sommelier suggest some alternatives for the wine." "See that you do?" She waved me away like I was a particularly persistent fly. As I turned to leave, I heard Kevin whisper urgently to Jessica, "You never told me your mother was dead." My blood froze. I stopped walking, every nerve in my body suddenly alert. "She is." Jessica's voice was barely audible, but I caught every word. "She died when I was 22. Car accident." The lie hit me like a physical blow. I'd been dead for 6 years in my daughter's version of reality, buried so she could marry into a family that apparently had standards about their children's backgrounds. But that wasn't even the worst part of what I was about to discover. Dead for 6 years. That's how long Jessica had been telling her husband's family that I didn't exist. Standing there with a tray of dirty dishes, listening to my own child erase me from her life story. I felt something crack inside my chest that had nothing to do with heartbreak and everything to do with fury. You have to understand, I'd sacrificed everything for that girl. Everything. 8 years ago, I was Linda Carter, co-owner of Carter & Associates Investment Consulting. My business partner and husband, Robert Carter, had built something beautiful together. A firm that specialized in international markets, particularly emerging Asian economies. We had offices in downtown Seattle, a client list that read like a Fortune 500 directory, and enough money to send Jessica to any college she wanted. Then, Robert decided our marriage was boring, and our secretary was fascinating. The divorce was brutal enough, but discovering that my loving husband had been slowly transferring assets into accounts I couldn't access. That was when I learned that loving someone doesn't make you immune to their betrayal. Robert disappeared with our financial advisor, who turned out to be his girlfriend, taking approximately $2.8 million and leaving me with a mortgage, a mountain of debt, and a business that couldn't survive without its primary client base. Jessica was 20 when her world collapsed. One day, she was a sophomore at Northwestern studying international business. The next, she was listening to me explain why she'd need to transfer to a state school and get a part-time job. This isn't permanent, I'd promised her, both of us crying in our nearly empty house. I'll rebuild. We'll get back everything we lost. She'd nodded, but I'd seen something die in her eyes that day. The certainty that her mother could fix anything had been replaced by the cold reality that even successful people could lose everything in a matter of months. I'd spent the next year trying to rebuild the business, but Robert had poisoned too many wells. Former clients wouldn't return my calls. Industry contacts suddenly had no time for meetings. The few clients who remained couldn't provide enough revenue to keep the doors open. By Jessica's 21st birthday, I was waiting tables at Romano's and living in a one-bedroom apartment that smelled like the Chinese restaurant downstairs. That was 7 years ago. "Mom, you can't give up," Jessica had said during one of our increasingly rare dinners together. "You know more about international investing than half the men in Seattle. You speak 3 languages. You have connections." I'd smiled and changed the subject, because I didn't have the heart to tell her that connections only matter when people want to be connected to you. Success had many friends. Failure dined alone. Jessica graduated summa cum laude with a degree in international business and a comprehensive understanding of global markets. She was brilliant, ambitious, and absolutely determined never to be poor again. She got a job at a tech startup, then moved to a bigger firm, then somehow landed at a consulting company that worked with Asian corporations. That's where she met Kevin Chun. Kevin represented everything we'd lost. Family, money, social status, the kind of security that let you make choices based on preference rather than necessity. He was also genuinely nice from what I could tell during our few awkward meetings. Polite, educated, clearly smitten with my daughter. The engagement was quick. The wedding planned in 3 months. Jessica apologized for the small ceremony, explaining that Kevin's family preferred intimate gatherings. I'd been hurt but understanding. Rich families had their traditions. What I hadn't understood was that I wasn't being excluded from their traditions. I was being excluded from existence entirely. She died when I was 22. Car accident. Standing in Romano's, watching my daughter nod sympathetically as her mother-in-law offered condolences for my fictional death, I felt 8 years of suppressed anger crystallize into something sharp and focused. Mrs. Chun was saying something about orphans and strength. How Jessica's tragic loss had probably contributed to her admirable independence. Kevin was squeezing Jessica's hand supportively, telling her how proud he was of how she'd overcome such devastating loss. The performance was flawless. Jessica's eyes even welled up slightly as she talked about missing Mom every day and wishing I could have met Kevin. I wanted to march over and introduce myself to the grieving widow, but something held me back. Maybe it was years of customer service training, or maybe it was the fascinating conversation happening in Mandarin between Mrs. Chan and the elderly man at the head of the table. They thought they were speaking privately, but I understood every word. "The girl has no family," Mrs. Chun was saying. "No connections, no background we need to worry about. Kevin chose well." "Perhaps," the old man replied, his voice carrying the weight of someone accustomed to making final decisions. "But something troubles me about her. She watches too carefully when we speak our language. She's just polite, father." "American politeness." "No," he said firmly. "She watches like someone who understands more than she shows. I don't like deception in family." If only he knew just how much deception was sitting at his table. That's when Mrs. Chun looked at me again, and I saw the exact moment an idea formed behind her perfectly made-up eyes. An idea that would give her the chance to humiliate both the lying daughter-in-law and the working-class mother simultaneously. She smiled, and I knew that smile meant trouble. The conversation in Mandarin continued for another 10 minutes while I pretended to clean tables within earshot. Mrs. Chun was explaining her plan to the elderly man, Grandfather Chun, Kevin's father's father, and apparently the family patriarch. If she's hiding a living mother who works as a servant, Mrs. Chan said, switching between Mandarin and English in that way bilingual families do, then we should see exactly what kind of family Kevin has married into. Grandfather Chan listened without expression, occasionally nodding. At 78, he had the kind of presence that made younger family members unconsciously straighten their posture when he looked their way. His suit was perfectly tailored. His watch cost more than most people's cars, and his eyes missed nothing. "You want to expose the lie publicly," he said finally. "I want to understand what else she's hiding. If she'll lie about her mother being dead, what else isn't true? Her education, her work experience. For all we know, the girl is a complete fraud." From my position restocking wine glasses, I could see Jessica growing increasingly uncomfortable with the extended Mandarin conversation. She kept glancing at Kevin, who was caught between translating for his wife and participating in his family's discussion. "What are they talking about?" Jessica finally asked, her smile tightening slightly. "Just family business," Kevin replied, but his tone suggested he wasn't entirely comfortable with the direction of the conversation either. Mrs. Chan switched back to English with the fluid ease of someone who wielded multiple languages like weapons. "Jessica, dear, Kevin tells us you studied international business." "Yes, at Northwestern." Jessica's answer was confident. No hint of the lie she'd been living. "And your specialization?" "Asian markets primarily. I've always been fascinated by the economic development in China, particularly the technology sector." It was true as far as it went. Jessica had written her senior thesis on Chinese tech companies and their global expansion strategies. What she wasn't mentioning was where she'd learned to analyze international markets, or who had spent hours teaching her to read financial statements and understand currency fluctuations. Mrs. Chen smiled. "How wonderful. And this interest in Chinese business, where did it come from?" "Family influence." I watched my daughter's face carefully. This was dangerous territory, and Jessica knew it. "I've always been drawn to understanding different cultures and economic systems," she said diplomatically. "I believe global business requires genuine appreciation for diverse perspectives." Excellent answer. Vague enough to avoid specifics, intellectual enough to sound impressive. "Of course," Mrs. Chen agreed, "though I imagine it must have been challenging studying such complex topics without family guidance. Orphans often struggle with subjects that require cultural context." The word orphan hung in the air like a challenge. Jessica's smile never wavered, but I saw her hands clench slightly in her lap. "I've been fortunate to have excellent professors and mentors," she replied. "Still," Mrs. Chun continued, "there's something to be said for family wisdom. My husband's father, for instance, built our family's first business from nothing. Kevin grew up hearing stories of negotiation strategies, cultural nuances, the importance of understanding not just what people say, but how they think." Grandfather Chan spoke for the first time since the family discussion. "Young woman, do you speak any Mandarin?" Jessica shook her head. "I'm afraid not. I've always meant to learn, but languages are windows into souls," he said. His English accented but precise. In business, especially with Chinese companies, language reveals respect or lack of it. I could see Kevin growing uncomfortable with his grandfather's intensity. Yeah. Jessica has been incredibly successful in her work with international clients. Her results speak for themselves. Results can be interpreted many ways, Mrs. Chan interjected smoothly. Success without understanding can be temporary. The conversation was becoming pointed enough that other family members were beginning to pay attention. Aunts and uncles who had been chatting among themselves were now listening, sensing drama. "Perhaps," Mrs. Chan said, her voice taking on the tone of someone about to make an announcement, "we should arrange a family dinner somewhere that provides an opportunity for Jessica to demonstrate her understanding of Asian business culture." "That sounds lovely," Jessica replied, though her voice carried a note of weariness. "I know the perfect place," Mrs. Chun continued. "A restaurant where the staff can accommodate our family's preferences for authentic communication. Somewhere we can all be ourselves." Grandfather Chan studied Mrs. Chun for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Interesting idea. When were you thinking?" "Tomorrow evening." Mrs. Chen's smile was pure predator. "I'll make arrangements." As I watched this exchange, pretending to polish silverware that was already spotless, I realized I was witnessing something far more complex than simple family dinner planning. Mrs. Chun wasn't just suspicious about Jessica's background. She was actively setting a trap. And based on the look in Grandfather Chen's eyes, he was curious enough to let her spring it. The family began making their departure around 9:30, gathering coats and exchanging goodbyes in the mix of languages that seemed natural to them. Jessica and Kevin were among the last to leave, and I caught a brief moment of their conversation as they passed my station. "Your mother seems lovely," Jessica was saying, but her tone suggested she didn't entirely believe her own words. "She can be protective of family," Kevin replied diplomatically. "Tomorrow's dinner will be good. Once she gets to know you better, you'll see her softer side." Jessica nodded, but I could see the worry in her eyes. She sensed something was wrong, but couldn't identify exactly what. After they left, I finished my closing duties on autopilot, my mind racing through the implications of what I'd witnessed. Mrs. Chen knew Jessica was lying about something, and she was planning to expose it publicly. What she didn't know was that her plan was about to give me the perfect opportunity for a conversation 7 years in the making. As I drove home to my small apartment, I made a decision that would change everything. It was time for Linda Carter to stop being dead. I spent that night doing something I hadn't done in 7 years, preparing for battle. My apartment might have been small, but I'd kept everything that mattered from my old life. Financial journals, business cards, correspondence files, and most importantly, my language materials. You don't forget 2 decades of international business just because your husband steals your company. I pulled out my Mandarin practice books, my Cantonese conversation guides, and the stack of business cards from every Chinese executive I'd ever worked with. Robert might have destroyed my professional reputation in Seattle, but he hadn't erased my expertise. Between 2003 and 2014, Carter and Associates had specialized in helping American companies navigate Chinese markets. I'd spent countless hours studying not just the language, but the cultural nuances that made or broke international business relationships. I understood the importance of face, the subtleties of hierarchy, the way respect was earned and maintained in Chinese business culture. I also knew exactly who Grandfather Chun was, Chun Wei-ming. I'd researched his company extensively in 2009 when one of our clients was considering a partnership with Chun Industries. Back then, he was building an empire in renewable energy technology, starting with solar panel manufacturing and expanding into wind turbines and battery storage systems. What made him interesting wasn't just his business success. It was his reputation for identifying and mentoring talent. Chun Industries was known for promoting people based on capability rather than connections. Unusual in family-dominated Chinese corporations. More importantly, I remembered reading about his personal philosophy in a Harvard Business Review interview. "Business is people," he'd said. "Technology changes, markets shift, but people who understand both numbers and hearts. These people build lasting success." Mrs. Chen's plan to humiliate Jessica was about to backfire spectacularly because she was making one crucial mistake. She assumed that exposing a waitress as someone's mother would embarrass both women. She didn't know she was exposing a former investment consultant who had once advised Fortune 500 companies on Asian market strategies. I spent 3 hours reviewing everything I could find about Chen Industries' recent activities, their expansion into electric vehicle charging infrastructure, their partnership with the Seattle Port Authority on green energy initiatives, their new research facility in Bellevue focused on battery technology. By the time I went to bed, I had a plan. The next morning, I called in sick to Romanos. Marcus wasn't happy, but I promised to find someone to cover my shifts for the rest of the week. "Linda, you never take time off," he said suspiciously. "Everything okay?" "Just some family business that needs attention," I replied. Which was certainly true. I spent the morning shopping for something I hadn't worn in years. Professional attire. Nothing too expensive. I couldn't afford designer clothes, but something that suggested competence rather than desperation. A simple black dress, a structured blazer, and shoes that wouldn't scream restaurant worker. The afternoon was devoted to research and preparation. I reviewed Chen Industries' latest quarterly reports, their environmental initiatives, their expansion plans. I studied recent interviews with Grandfather Chun, noting his opinions on American business practices and his concerns about sustainability. Most importantly, I prepared for the conversation I'd been wanting to have with Jessica for 6 years. At 5:30, I drove to Romano's and parked across the street where I could watch the entrance. Mrs. Chun had made reservations for 8 people at 7 o'clock, requesting the same corner table they'd occupied the night before. She'd specifically asked for the same waitress who served us yesterday evening. Marcus had confirmed that Linda Carter would be their server, except Linda Carter was sitting in her car, watching Mrs. Chen's plan unfold, exactly as expected. The Chun family arrived at 7 sharp with Jessica and Kevin following 5 minutes later. Perfect timing, as if they'd coordinated their entrance for maximum impact. I waited another 10 minutes, giving them time to order drinks and settle into their seats. Then I walked into Romano's through the kitchen entrance, bypassing the hostess station entirely. Marcus spotted me immediately. "Linda, I thought you were sick." "I feel much better," I said, straightening my blazer. "Has the Chun party been seated?" "Yeah, table 15, just like they requested. Maria's been covering for you, but if you're feeling up to it, I'll take them," I said. "This is something I need to handle personally." I walked through the dining room with a confidence I hadn't felt in years, carrying myself like the business executive I'd once been, rather than the invisible server I'd become. As I approached table 15, I could hear Mrs. Chun speaking in Mandarin, her voice carrying that particular tone of anticipation that suggested she was about to spring her trap. "The girl still doesn't understand us," she was saying. "Perfect. When her mother arrives, we'll have the entire conversation in front of her. Kevin will finally see what kind of family he married into." Jessica was looking increasingly uncomfortable, glancing around the restaurant as if sensing danger, but unable to identify its source. Grandfather Chun sat quietly, observing everything with the patience of a man who had spent decades making calculated decisions. I stopped beside their table, notepad ready, and smiled. "Good evening, everyone. I'm Linda, and I'll be your server tonight." Jessica looked up, and I watched 7 years of lies collide with reality in her eyes. The moment of recognition was electric. Jessica's face went completely white, then flushed red, then white again. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Mrs. Chun, who had been watching Jessica's reaction with satisfaction, turned to see what had caused such a dramatic response. "This is our waitress from last night," she said pleasantly, not yet understanding what was happening. "Yes," I replied in perfect Mandarin, my voice calm and professional. "Though I believe last night you mentioned something about generous tips for proper language service." The silence that followed was profound. Mrs. Chen's eyes widened as she realized I'd understood every word of their previous conversation. Grandfather Chun leaned forward slightly, his expression shifting from polite disinterest to genuine curiosity. And Jessica finally found her voice. "Mom," she whispered. The word hung in the air like a confession. Mrs. Chen's face went through several expressions in rapid succession. Confusion, realization, then something that looked remarkably like embarrassment. She'd been caught discussing her daughter-in-law's supposedly dead mother in front of said supposedly dead mother in a language she'd assumed said supposedly dead mother couldn't understand. "I see there's been some confusion," I said, still speaking in Mandarin, addressing Mrs. Chun directly. "Your daughter-in-law appears to have told you I was deceased. I can assure you that reports of my death have been greatly exaggerated." Grandfather Chun actually smiled at that, a slight upturn of his lips that suggested he appreciated both the language skills and the literary reference. Kevin looked like he was going to be sick. He stared at Jessica, then at me, then back at Jessica. "Jess," he said quietly, "you told me your mother died in a car accident." Jessica started, then stopped. There was no good way to explain this. Mrs. Chun recovered her composure with impressive speed. "Well," she said, switching to English, "this is certainly unexpected, isn't it?" I agreed, also switching to English for Kevin's benefit. "Though I understand you made a rather interesting offer last night about language service and tips." The rest of the Chun family was watching this exchange with fascination. Clearly, this wasn't the usual family dinner conversation. "You speak Mandarin fluently," Grandfather Chun observed, his tone neutral but interested. "I also speak Cantonese and basic Japanese," I replied. "It was necessary for my work in international business consulting." "What kind of consulting?" he asked. Jessica made a small noise that might have been a whimper. "Asian market analysis primarily. I specialized in helping American companies understand Chinese business culture and investment opportunities." I paused deliberately before my husband stole my company and disappeared with my business partner. The honesty was tactical. Better to control the narrative than let someone else discover the details. Ah, Grandfather Chan said, and that single syllable contained volumes of understanding. Betrayal is expensive indeed, which is why I've been working here for the past 7 years, rebuilding my life one table at a time. Mrs. Chan had been listening to this exchange with growing awareness of how badly her plan had backfired. Instead of exposing a shameful secret, she'd revealed a woman with exactly the kind of background and experience that the Chan family respected. Jessica, Kevin said, his voice strained. Why would you lie about this? My daughter looked around the table, surrounded by her husband's family, all of them waiting for an explanation that would make sense of the past 24 hours. She started again, then took a deep breath. I was ashamed. The words came out barely above a whisper, but they carried across the table clearly. Ashamed of what? Kevin asked. Of how far we'd fallen. Of losing everything. Of my mother having to wait tables because of what my father did to us. Jessica's voice was gaining strength but also pain. Your family has everything, money, status, respect. I didn't want you to know that we'd lost all of that, so you killed me off instead, I said dryly. Very considerate, Jessica flinched. I thought if you didn't exist, then our past didn't exist. I could just be the person I am now, not the person who used to have everything and lost it. Mrs. Chan was studying me with new interest. What did you say your specialization was? Asian markets, specifically Chinese technology sectors and renewable energy investments. I spent considerable time analyzing emerging companies in solar and wind power development. Grandfather Chan went very still. When was this? 2008 through 2014, primarily before the market really exploded. You were analyzing Chinese tech companies in 2008. He repeated slowly. Among others, there was one company I found particularly interesting. Chun Industries, small operation at the time, focusing on solar panel manufacturing with plans to expand into wind turbines. Excellent leadership, strong vision for sustainable energy integration. Now I had his complete attention. You researched my company extensively. I was advising a client who was considering partnership opportunities. Your approach to combining traditional manufacturing with innovative technology was fascinating, very forward-thinking for the time. Mrs. Chun looked between her father-in-law and me, clearly realizing that this conversation had taken an unexpected turn. What was your conclusion? Grandfather Chun asked. That Chun Industries was positioned to become a major player in renewable energy, but only if it could secure sufficient capital for expansion, without losing its focus on quality and innovation. I recommended my client pursue a limited partnership with specific technology licensing agreements. And did they? I smiled. No, they decided the Chinese market was too risky and chose to invest in a domestic solar company instead. Which company? Solyndra. Grandfather Chun actually laughed. They lost everything. All $500 million. I confirmed. Sometimes American companies are too afraid of risk to recognize opportunity. The conversation had completely shifted away from Jessica's lies and towards something much more interesting: business strategy and missed opportunities. I could see Mrs. Chun struggling to regain control of a situation that had spiraled far beyond her original plan. This is all very fascinating, she interjected. But perhaps we should focus on the more immediate issue of honesty in family relationships. Of course, I agreed. Jessica, would you like to explain to your husband why you chose to pretend I was dead, rather than simply explaining our circumstances? Jessica looked around the table, tears forming in her eyes. Because I was afraid, she said finally. Afraid that if Kevin knew the truth about our family's failure, he wouldn't want to marry me. Afraid that his family would think I was just after money and status. Were you? Grandfather Chun asked bluntly. After money and status? Jessica was quiet for a long moment. Then she nodded. Partly I'd been poor and I hated it. I wanted security and Kevin represented security. And what about love? Kevin asked quietly. I do love you, Jessica said, reaching for his hand. But I also loved what you represented. I'm not proud of that. But it's the truth. Mrs. Chun smiled triumphantly. There, she admits it. She married you for money. Actually, Grandfather Chun said, she admits to practical thinking. Marry for love alone, starve in a hut. Marry for money alone. Live in a beautiful prison. Marry for both, build something worth having. He turned to me. Your daughter is honest now. That's more than most people manage. Yes, I agreed. Though her honesty would have saved everyone considerable embarrassment if she'd chosen to share it earlier. Mrs. Chun was looking frustrated. Her plan to expose and humiliate had instead led to what seemed like a family therapy session with business networking opportunities. The question now, Grandfather Chun continued, is what we do with this information. That's when I realized the evening was far from over, and the most interesting part was just beginning. Grandfather Chun signaled the waiter. Not me but Marcus, who had been hovering nervously near our table for the past 10 minutes. We need privacy, he said simply. No interruptions. Marcus nodded and immediately moved other diners away from nearby tables, understanding that some conversations required space. Sit, Grandfather Chun said to me, indicating an empty chair that had been brought for their originally planned 8-person party. I'm working, I replied. You're not working right now. Your family meeting. His English was precise, and his tone borked no argument. I sat. Mrs. Chun looked like she wanted to object, but apparently Grandfather Chun's word was final in family matters. Now, he said, focusing on Jessica and Kevin, we discuss truth. All truth. No more lies. No more shame. No more hiding. He turned to Jessica first. You lied about your mother because you were afraid we would judge your family's poverty. Correct. Jessica nodded miserably. And you? He said to Kevin. You never asked difficult questions because you preferred comfortable lies. Correct. Kevin flushed but nodded as well. And you? He said to Mrs. Chun, you suspected lies but chose public humiliation instead of private conversation. Correct. Mrs. Chen's lips tightened, but she nodded. All of you made choices based on fear and pride. Very expensive emotions in business and family. He leaned back in his chair. Now we fix problems with facts instead of feelings. He turned to me. Linda Carter, former business consultant specializing in Asian markets. Lost everything due to husband's betrayal. Working as waitress for 7 years, still understands international business, speaks 3 languages, raised daughter who became successful despite family catastrophe. It was an efficient summary. Jessica Chun, he continued, educated, ambitious, married for love and security, intelligent enough to lie convincingly for 6 months, which requires considerable planning and emotional control. These are useful skills when applied honestly. Jessica looked surprised by what sounded almost like a compliment. Kevin Chun, he said to his grandson. Good heart, trusting nature, successful in business, but naive about people. Needs to learn that comfortable lies are more dangerous than uncomfortable truths. Kevin nodded slowly. Hilench, he said to his daughter-in-law. Protective of family, suspicious of outsiders, but poor judge of when suspicion is useful versus destructive. Mrs. Chen's expression suggested she wasn't entirely pleased with her assessment, but she didn't argue. Now, Grandfather Chun said, we discuss what happens next. He pulled out his phone and made a brief call in rapid Mandarin. I caught enough to understand he was asking someone to bring him some files from his car. In business, he said while we waited. Crisis reveals character. Tonight has been very educational. A young man appeared with a leather briefcase, setting it beside Grandfather Chen's chair before departing quickly. Linda, Grandfather Chun said, opening the briefcase and removing several documents. You said you recommended against Solyndra investment. What would you have recommended instead? The question seemed like a test, so I considered my answer carefully. In 2008, diversified investment in 3 companies. First Solar for established technology, Chun Industries for innovation potential, and BYD for market access. Equal shares, different risk profiles, coverage of major market segments. BYD, he repeated. Chinese company, battery and electric vehicle manufacturer. Warren Buffett invested in them 6 months after I wrote my recommendation. Grandfather Chun smiled and pulled out a document. Chun Industries investment partnership proposal written in 2009. Never implemented because American company chose Solyndra instead. He slid the paper across to me. It was my original business proposal with Chun Industries letterhead and extensive notes in what I recognized as Grandfather Chen's handwriting. You kept this, I said, surprised. I keep all interesting proposals. especially ones that understand my business better than most consultants. He paused. Your analysis was excellent. Your client was foolish. Mrs. Chun was looking back and forth between us with growing realization that this dinner was not going according to any plan she could have imagined. That was 8 years ago, I said. Good business ideas don't expire, Grandfather Chun replied. They wait for right time and right people. He pulled out another document. Current Chun Industries expansion plan, electric vehicle charging infrastructure, residential solar integration, battery storage systems, American market penetration. He said it in front of me. We need American business consultant who understands Chinese thinking and American markets. Someone with experience, language skills, and cultural knowledge. I stared at the document, not quite believing what was happening. Are you offering me a job? I asked. I'm offering you opportunity to rebuild what you lost. Different company, same expertise. Jessica was watching this exchange with an expression of absolute shock. What about? She gestured around the restaurant. What about what? I asked. My prestigious career in food service. Mrs. Chun had gone very quiet, apparently realizing that her plan to humiliate a waitress had instead connected her father-in-law with exactly the kind of business consultant he'd been looking for. There would be conditions, Grandfather Chun continued, no lies, no false presentation, no hiding of past failures or current circumstances, complete honesty about capabilities and limitations. He looked pointedly at Jessica. These conditions apply to entire family. Jessica's eyes were bright with tears, but for the first time tonight, they looked like tears of relief rather than fear. I can be honest, she said quietly. Good, because Linda Carter's daughter should not be ashamed of Linda Carter. She should be proud that her mother survived betrayal and kept fighting. He closed the briefcase and stood up. Think about proposal. We meet next week to discuss details. As the Chun family prepared to leave, Grandfather Chun approached me one more time. Your husband was foolish, man, he said quietly. He threw away excellent business partner and excellent woman. His loss creates opportunity for people who recognize value. After they left, Jessica lingered behind while Kevin went to bring their car around. Mom, she said, her voice barely audible. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I looked at my daughter. Really looked at her for the first time in years. You should be, I said. But sorry doesn't fix anything. What matters now is what you do next. What do I do next? You learn to tell the truth even when it's inconvenient. You learn to be proud of your family, even when we're not perfect. And you learn that running away from problems doesn't make them disappear. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. Also, I added, you learn to speak Mandarin. If you're going to be part of this family, you should understand what they're saying about you. Despite everything, Jessica smiled. For the first time in 7 years, it felt like my daughter was actually glad to see me alive. 3 days later, I was sitting in Chun Industries Bellevue headquarters, wearing the first business suit I'd owned in 8 years, and feeling like I was stepping back into a life I'd thought was permanently lost. The building was impressive glass and steel architecture that managed to feel both modern and timeless with enough solar panels on the roof to power a small city. Inside, the reception area displayed awards for environmental innovation, alongside traditional Chinese art pieces that spoke to the company's cultural roots. Grandfather Chen's assistant, an efficient woman named Min, had called the day after our dinner to schedule what she described as preliminary consultation meeting. I'd spent the intervening time researching everything I could find about Chun Industries' recent activities, their competitors, and their expansion challenges. What I discovered was fascinating. The company had grown exponentially since my 2009 analysis, but their American market penetration was still limited by cultural and regulatory barriers that I was uniquely positioned to help them navigate. Mr. Chun will see you now, Mlin said, leading me through a corridor lined with photographs of renewable energy installations around the world. Grandfather Chen's office was surprisingly simple. A large desk, comfortable chairs, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Seattle skyline. No ostentatious displays of wealth, just the tools necessary for serious business. Linda, he said, rising to greet me. Thank you for coming. Thank you for the opportunity. He gestured to a chair across from his desk. Before we discuss business, I want to understand something. Why did you accept meeting? It was a fair question. Because you're offering me a chance to use skills I thought were permanently obsolete, And because your company is exactly the kind of operation I'd always hoped to work with. Not because of Jessica, partly because of Jessica, I admitted, but mostly because I've spent 7 years waiting tables and I'm tired of being invisible. He nodded approvingly. Good answer. People who work only for family become weak. People who work only for money become cruel. People who work for both become strong. He opened a folder on his desk. I researched Linda Carter and Carter and Associates very thoroughly. I felt my stomach tighten. And your former clients speak highly of your work. Even after 8 years, your analysis was consistently accurate, your cultural insights valuable, and your language skills excellent. He paused. They also speak poorly of your husband. Universally seems he burned many bridges after taking your money. Robert was always better at charm than character, I said. Character reveals itself under pressure. Grandfather Chun agreed. Which brings me to current situation. He slid several documents across the desk. Chun Industries' American Expansion Plan. 3 phases over 5 years. Solar residential installation, commercial battery storage, electric vehicle charging infrastructure. I reviewed the materials quickly, noting market analysis, financial projections, and regulatory considerations. Ambitious timeline, I said. What's driving the urgency? Competition. American companies finally realizing renewable energy is not temporary trend. If we wait, market becomes more difficult to enter. And the challenge is same as always. American businesses don't trust Chinese companies. Regulatory approval takes too long. Local partnerships require cultural understanding we don't have. I looked up from the documents. These are solvable problems with right consultant. He agreed. Someone who understands both sides. Someone who can translate not just language but thinking. What kind of role are you envisioning? Senior Consultant, American Business Development. Direct reporting to me. Salary commensurate with responsibility. He named a figure that made me blink. It was more than I'd earned at the height of Carter and Associates' success. That's generous, I managed. Not generous, practical. Good consultants cost money. Bad consultants cost more money. I prefer first option. And Jessica, I asked, how does my working for your company affect her situation with the family? Grandfather Chun was quiet for a moment. Jessica created problem by lying. She fixes problem by proving she can be trusted. Your work performance is separate issue. But if I fail, if you fail, you fail. If Jessica fails, she fails. Success and failure are individual responsibilities. It was a refreshingly clear arrangement. I'd like to review the materials more thoroughly before giving you an answer, I said. Of course, take 1 week. But Linda, he paused. Understand that this opportunity exists because you demonstrated expertise and honesty when tested. These qualities are rare. As I gathered the documents, Grandfather Chun asked one final question. What was biggest mistake your husband made in business terms? I thought about it. He confused taking advantage of people with being smart. He thought short-term gains were more important than long-term relationships. And what was your biggest mistake? That was harder to answer honestly. I trusted someone to value our partnership as much as I did. I didn't protect myself against betrayal. Good answers. Trust is necessary for business, but verification is necessary for survival. Walking back to my car, I felt something I hadn't experienced in 8 years. Professional excitement. The Chun Industries project was exactly the kind of complex, challenging work that I'd always loved. International business development, cultural bridge building, market analysis, everything I was genuinely good at. But more than that, it was a chance to rebuild my life on my own terms, using my own skills without depending on anyone else's loyalty or honesty. My phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. Kevin told me about your meeting. I'm proud of you, Mom, and I'm sorry it took so long for me to say that. I smiled and typed back. Pride isn't something you give someone, something you earn. But thank you. For the first time in 7 years, I felt like Linda Carter was coming back to life. And this time, I wasn't sharing ownership with anyone. I spent the next week preparing for what felt like the most important business decision of my life. The Chun Industries documents revealed a company at a crucial expansion point. Successful enough to take significant risks, but not so established that failure wouldn't be costly. Their American market penetration strategy was smart but incomplete. They understood the technical challenges of renewable energy infrastructure, but they underestimated the cultural and political complexities of doing business in the United States as a Chinese company. That's where my expertise would be invaluable. On Friday morning, I called Mai Lin to schedule a follow-up meeting. Mr. Chun can see you Monday at 10 o'clock, she said. He's asked that you prepare a preliminary assessment of the market entry challenges. That weekend, I worked harder than I had in years analyzing market data, regulatory requirements, and competitive landscapes. I also spent considerable time researching public perception of Chinese companies in American markets. Because success would depend as much on managing public relations as on delivering quality products. Monday morning, I arrived at Chen Industries with a 30-page analysis and a clear recommendation. Linda, Grandfather Chan said, gesturing me to the conference table where several other executives were already seated. Please meet my senior team. The introductions were conducted in both English and Mandarin, establishing my language skills immediately. The team was impressive. Engineers, financial analysts, and marketing specialists who clearly knew their business inside and out. We've reviewed your background, said Director Zhang, the head of American operations. Very interesting resume. What's your assessment of our expansion timeline? Too aggressive, I said immediately. You're trying to enter 3 market segments simultaneously, which will strain resources and divide focus. The room went quiet. Apparently, they weren't expecting criticism. Explain. Grandfather Chan said. American businesses are suspicious of Chinese companies, especially in technology sectors. If you launch 3 major initiatives at once, you'll be seen as an invasion rather than a partnership. Regulatory approval will be slower, public resistance will be higher, and competitors will have time to organize opposition. What do you recommend? Director Zhang asked. Sequential entry. Start with residential solar installation. It's the most politically palatable and has the highest consumer acceptance. Use that success to build relationships and credibility, then expand into commercial battery storage, then vehicle charging infrastructure. That delays our timeline by 2 years. Another executive pointed out. It ensures your timeline is achievable. I replied. Fast failure is still failure. Grandfather Chun was smiling slightly. Continue. You also need American partnerships, not just American customers. Find established companies that need your technology but lack your manufacturing capabilities. Joint ventures reduce political resistance and provide market credibility. I opened my folder and distributed copies of my analysis. I've identified 6 potential partners in the solar installation sector, 3 in battery storage and 4 in vehicle charging. All have complementary capabilities and established customer bases. The room was quiet while they reviewed my recommendations. This approach requires patience, Director Zhang observed. All worthwhile success requires patience, Grandfather Chan replied. Quick success is usually temporary success. We spent the next 2 hours going through my analysis in detail. The team asked excellent questions, challenging my assumptions and testing my understanding of market dynamics. It felt like the kind of productive business meeting I'd missed desperately. Preliminary assessment is excellent, Grandfather Chan said as the meeting concluded. Now we discuss practical matters. After the others left, he handed me a formal offer letter, Senior Consultant, American Business Development, base salary, performance bonuses, equity participation, start date negotiable. I read through the terms carefully. The compensation was generous. The responsibilities were significant and the equity participation could be substantial if the American expansion succeeded. This is more than I expected, I said. Good consultants create value beyond their compensation. I expect you to be good consultant. I accept, I said. We shook hands and I felt a satisfaction I hadn't experienced since the early days of Carter and Associates. One more thing, Grandfather Chen said. Your daughter and Kevin requested meeting this afternoon. They want to discuss family situation. I wasn't sure what that meant, but I agreed to meet them at a coffee shop near Jessica's office. Jessica and Kevin arrived together, both looking nervous but determined. Mom, Jessica began. We want to talk about our relationship. Kevin and I have been discussing everything that happened, and we realize we need to make some changes. What kind of changes? Honesty, Kevin said. Complete honesty. No more lies, no more hiding, no more pretending to be something we're not. That's a good start, I said. We also want to rebuild our relationship with you, Jessica continued. I know I hurt you by pretending you were dead, and I know it will take time to earn your trust back. It will, I agreed. But we'd like to try, Kevin said. If you're willing. I looked at my daughter, really seeing her for perhaps the first time since she was a child. She was still beautiful, still ambitious, but there was something different in her eyes now. Something that looked like genuine regret and real determination to do better. Jessica, I said, I will always love you, but love isn't enough to build a relationship on. Trust, respect, and genuine care for each other's well-being. Those are the foundations of family. I understand, she said. And I want to earn all of those things. Then we can try, I said. But understand that this will take time, and it will require consistent effort from both of us. Kevin reached across the table and took my hand. Mrs. Carter, I want to apologize for not asking the right questions. I should have known that someone as accomplished as Jessica had family who shaped her success. You can call me Linda, I said. Duh. An apology accepted. We spent another hour talking about practical matters. Family dinners, holidays, communication expectations. It felt strange and wonderful to be planning a future that included my daughter again. As we prepared to leave, Jessica asked one more question. Mom, are you happy? Are you with the job, with how everything worked out? I thought about it. I'm satisfied, I said. Happiness is something I'll have to build just like everything else. Can we help? She asked. You can try, I said. But first, you need to learn to speak Mandarin. If you're going to be part of the Chun family, you should understand what they're saying about you. Jessica laughed. And for the first time in years, it sounded genuine. Walking back to my car, I reflected on how dramatically my life had changed in 1 week. From invisible waitress to senior business consultant, from estranged mother to cautiously hopeful family member. But the most important change was internal. For the first time since Robert's betrayal, I felt like I had control over my own future, and that was worth more than any salary or title. 6 months into my new position at Chen Industries, I was reviewing quarterly expansion reports when men knocked on my office door. Linda, there's someone here to see you, says it's urgent. I looked up from the spreadsheets that had been consuming my morning. Who is it? Robert Carter claims to be your ex-husband. The coffee cup slipped from my hand, shattering against the floor and sending hot liquid across my shoes. 8 years. 8 years of silence. And now Robert was standing in the lobby of my new workplace. Should I call security? Me asked, noting my reaction. No, I said, standing up and straightening my jacket. Send him up, but leave my door open and stay nearby. I had 3 minutes to prepare for a conversation I'd imagined 1,000 times, but never expected to actually have. Robert entered my office looking older, grayer, and considerably less confident than the man who had destroyed my life. His expensive suit couldn't hide the fact that he looked tired, perhaps even desperate. Linda, he said, stopping just inside the doorway. You look successful. I am successful, I replied, not inviting him to sit. What do you want, Robert? I heard about your position here. Chun Industries is a major player in renewable energy. Is that what you came to discuss? My career. He shifted uncomfortably. I came to talk about us, about what happened, about making things right. The audacity was breathtaking. Making things right. I know I made mistakes. You didn't make mistakes, Robert. You committed calculated theft. You stole our company, our money, and 8 years of my life. Linda, please let me explain. Explain what? How you systematically transferred assets into accounts I couldn't access. How you convinced our financial advisor to help you while she was sleeping with you. How you left me with nothing but debt and a mortgage I couldn't pay. Robert flinched at each accusation, but he didn't deny them. I was in a difficult situation, he said finally. The business was struggling. I thought I could fix things, make it profitable again by stealing from your partner and wife, by taking control before everything collapsed. I stared at him. Is that honestly how you've been justifying this to yourself? That you were saving the company by stealing it? Carter and Associates was failing, Linda. We were losing clients, missing payments. I did what I thought was necessary. What happened to the company after you took it? Robert was quiet. What happened, Robert? It didn't work out as planned. The company failed within 2 years, I said. You destroyed everything we built for nothing. The market was difficult. The market was fine. You were the problem. You were always the problem. Min appeared in the doorway. Linda, Mr. Chun is here for your 2 o'clock meeting. Perfect timing. Grandfather Chun entered my office, took one look at Robert, and immediately understood that this was not a business meeting. Grandfather Chun, I said in Mandarin, this is Robert Carter, my former husband and business partner. He was just leaving. Grandfather Chun studied Robert with the kind of attention usually reserved for potentially dangerous insects. Mr. Carter, he said in accented English, I have heard much about you. None of it favorable. Robert looked between us, clearly realizing that this was not going to be a private conversation. Who is this? Robert asked me. This is Chun Wei-Ming, founder and chairman of Chin Industries, my employer and the man whose company is worth more than anything you could ever dream of building. The introduction was pointed as Robert had always been impressed by wealth and status, and Grandfather Chun represented both in quantities that dwarfed anything Robert had ever achieved. Mr. Chun, Robert said, extending his hand, I'm pleased to meet you. I actually founded the company where Linda learned her consulting skills. Grandfather Chun ignored the offered handshake. You founded nothing, he said calmly. You stole from partner, destroyed business, and abandoned responsibilities. These are not actions of founder. These are actions of thief. Robert's face flushed. I don't think you understand the complexities of the situation. I understand perfectly. Man who betrays business partner will betray anyone. Man who steals from wife has no honor. Man who defends these actions has no character. The assessment was delivered without emotion, which somehow made it more devastating than if it had been angry. Linda, Robert said, turning back to me. Can we talk privately? No, I said, you forfeited the right to private conversations when you stole my company and disappeared. I didn't disappear. I've been in Portland running a consulting business successfully? Grandfather Chun asked. Robert hesitated. It's been challenging. Translation. I said it failed just like everything else you touched after leaving me. Linda, that's not fair. Fair. I stood up, my voice rising. You want to talk about fair? Fair would have been discussing our financial problems instead of stealing from me. Fair would have been divorce proceedings that didn't leave me homeless. Fair would have been any consideration for the woman who helped you build everything you stole. Robert looked around my office, taking in the expensive furniture, the view of Seattle's skyline, the awards and certificates that represented my success. You've done well for yourself, he said finally. I've rebuilt what you destroyed, I corrected him. Without your help, without your money, and without your approval. I'm glad, he said. And for a moment he sounded sincere. I always knew you were talented. Then why did you steal from me? The question hung in the air without an answer. What do you want, Robert? I asked again. I want to make amends. I want to pay back what I took. Grandfather Chun made a sound that might have been laughter. You can repay 8 years of stolen income? I asked. You can repay the professional reputation you destroyed. You can repay the stress, the humiliation, the nights I spent working double shifts at a restaurant because my partner stole my livelihood. I can try, Robert said quietly. How much? Grandfather Chun asked suddenly. Excuse me. How much money do you have to repay debt to Linda? Robert hesitated. I don't have liquid capital right now, but how much? Grandfather Chun repeated. Maybe 50,000 if I liquidate some assets. The silence that followed was profound. Original theft was $2.8 million. Grandfather Chun said interest over 8 years, lost income, damaged reputation, total debt approximately $15 million. Robert went pale. $50,000, Grandfather Chun continued, is insulting gesture, not serious repayment. I understand the amount seems small. Amount is not small, Grandfather Chun said. Amount is meaningless, like offering single grain of rice to starving person. I looked at my ex-husband, this man who had once been my partner in business and life, and felt something I hadn't expected. Pity, Robert, I said quietly. I don't want your $50,000. I don't want your apologies. I don't want anything from you. Then what can I do? You can leave. You can go back to Portland in your failing consulting business and never contact me again. Linda, you can also remember that the woman you thought you destroyed is now more successful than you ever were. That the company you stole and ruined has been replaced by something better. That your betrayal, which you thought was so clever, actually freed me to build a life you could never have given me. Robert stared at me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. I'm sorry, he said. I know you are, I replied. But sorry doesn't undo the damage. It just means you finally understand the cost. After he left, Grandfather Chan and I sat in silence for several minutes. Difficult conversation, he observed finally. Necessary conversation, I replied. Some ghosts need to be faced before they can be buried. And now I get back to work. The quarterly reports won't analyze themselves. Grandfather Chan smiled. Good answer. Past creates lessons, not limitations. That evening, I called Jessica to tell her about Robert's visit. How do you feel? She asked after I described the conversation. Relieved, I said, surprised by my own answer. For 8 years I've been angry at a memory. Today I realized that the memory was more powerful than the reality. What do you mean? I mean that Robert is just a middle-aged man who made terrible choices and has been living with the consequences ever since. He's not the monster I'd built him up to be in my mind. He's just someone who betrayed his principles and lost everything that mattered. Do you forgive him? I thought about it. Forgiveness implies that what he did was forgivable. It wasn't. But I'm not going to let his choices continue controlling my life. That sounds healthy. Feels healthy. I agreed. Like finally putting down a weight I'd been carrying without realizing how heavy it was. Mom. Yes. I'm proud of you for everything you've accomplished, for how you handled today, for the person you've become. Thank you, sweetheart. That means more than you know. After we hung up, I sat on my apartment balcony, looking out at the Seattle skyline and thinking about the strange journey that had brought me to this moment. 8 years ago, Robert's betrayal had felt like the end of my world. Tonight, it felt like it had been the beginning of a much better one. 2 years after Robert's visit, I was sitting in the boardroom of Chen Industries' new American headquarters, reviewing the quarterly reports that showed our U.S. operations had exceeded all projected targets for the third consecutive quarter. The residential solar division was operating in 12 states. Our commercial battery storage partnerships had expanded to include major retailers and manufacturing companies. The electric vehicle charging infrastructure project was ahead of schedule and under budget. More importantly, we'd achieved something I'd considered impossible when I first reviewed their expansion plans. Chen Industries was now seen as an American success story that happened to be Chinese-owned, rather than a Chinese invasion of American markets. Outstanding results, Grandfather Chan said, reviewing the same reports from his position at the head of the table. American expansion is exceeding all projections. The senior team around the table, half American executives, half Chinese expatriates, represented exactly the kind of cultural integration that made complex international business actually work. Linda, Director Zhang said, the partnership with Morrison Electric has requested expansion into 5 additional states. They want to triple their solar installation capacity. Excellent, I replied. That puts us ahead of the timeline for Phase 3 implementation. My phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. Dinner tonight. Kevin's parents are in town and want to see you. I smiled and typed back, looking forward to it. The relationship with Jessica had slowly rebuilt over the past 2 years. Not the mother-daughter relationship we'd had when she was young, but something stronger. A friendship between 2 adults who respected each other's capabilities and chose to prioritize family connection. Kevin and Jessica's marriage had also strengthened considerably once honesty became their default communication style. It turned out that Kevin found Jessica's ambition and survival instincts attractive rather than concerning. And Jessica discovered that Kevin's genuine kindness wasn't a weakness to be exploited, but a strength to be treasured. Meeting adjourned, Grandfather Chen announced. Excellent work, everyone. As the room cleared, he gestured for me to remain behind. Linda, I have a proposal for you. Another expansion project. Different kind of expansion. Personal expansion. I wasn't sure what that meant. Chen Industries Europe division needs senior consultant for renewable energy market development. Based in London, travel throughout European Union. Excellent opportunity for someone with your skills. The offer was intriguing but unexpected. Are you trying to get rid of me? Grandfather Chen laughed. Opposite. I'm trying to give you opportunity for growth that American division cannot provide. What about the American operations? American operations are successful because of systems you created, partnerships you negotiated, cultural bridges you built. These systems will continue without daily supervision. He was right. The American expansion had succeeded because we'd established sustainable processes and reliable partnerships, not because of constant crisis management. London, I said, considering the possibility 2-year assignment, salary increase, housing allowance, equity participation in European expansion. Return to Seattle whenever you choose. Why me? Because European markets have same cultural challenges as American markets, but different regulatory environment. You understand how to translate Chinese business thinking into Western frameworks. It was an enormous opportunity, the kind of career advancement I'd never dared hope for after Robert's betrayal. Can I think about it? Of course. But understand that this represents recognition of exceptional performance. Chun Industries does not offer international assignments to mediocre consultants. That evening I met Jessica, Kevin, and his parents at a restaurant that had become our regular family gathering place. Not Romano's. I'd never set foot in that place again, but a quiet neighborhood spot where we could talk without interruption. "Mom, you look excited about something," Jessica observed as we ordered wine. "Grandfather Chun offered me a position in London, European market development." London. Kevin's mother, who had completely reversed her opinion of me over the past 2 years, looked thrilled. "How wonderful, though we'll miss you terribly." "It's just for 2 years," I said. "And I haven't decided yet." "What's holding you back?" Jessica asked. I thought about it. I've spent the last 10 years rebuilding my life in Seattle. This apartment, this job, our relationship, everything I've worked for is here. "Mom," Jessica said gently, 2 years ago you were waiting tables and we hadn't spoken in 6 years. Look how much can change when you take chances on new opportunities." She was right. Of course. Also, Kevin added, "Jessica and I have been talking about spending a year in London anyway. My company wants to establish a European office, and Jessica's been offered a consulting position with an international development firm. You'd be there too. If you take the job," Jessica said, "we'd coordinate our timing so we could all be there together." The possibility of working in London while having family nearby was appealing. "What do you think I should do?" I asked the table. "I think," Kevin's father said, "that successful people take calculated risks when the potential reward exceeds the possible cost." I think, his mother added, "that you've earned the right to pursue opportunities that excite you rather than just opportunities that provide security." I think, Jessica said, "that my mother is brilliant and capable and deserves to see how far her talents can take her." I think, Kevin, that Grandfather Chun doesn't make offers like this lightly. If he thinks you're ready for this challenge, you probably are. Looking around the table at these people who have become my family, not through birth or obligation, but through choice and effort, I realized something important. For the first time in my adult life, I was making a decision based purely on potential rather than fear. "I'm going to take it," I said. The table erupted in congratulations and excited planning conversations about London neighborhoods and weekend trips to Paris. Later that night, as I sat in my apartment looking out at Seattle's skyline one more time, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought me to this moment. 5 years ago, I'd been a waitress being humiliated by a customer who spoke a language she assumed I couldn't understand. Tomorrow, I'd be accepting a position as senior international consultant for one of the world's largest renewable energy companies. The transformation had nothing to do with luck, and everything to do with recognizing that my knowledge, skills, and experience had value regardless of what other people chose to see. I picked up my phone and called Grandfather Chun. "I accept your offer," I said when he answered. "Excellent decision. When can you start?" "Give me 2 months to transition my current projects and find someone to cover my apartment." "Done. Welcome to Chun Industries Europe. Linda Carter." After hanging up, I poured myself a glass of wine and made a toast to my empty apartment. "Here's to second chances," I said aloud. "And to never letting anyone make you invisible again." The reflection in my window showed a 52-year-old woman who had lost everything and rebuilt it into something better than she'd ever imagined possible. Sometimes the best revenge isn't destroying the people who hurt you. Sometimes it's thriving so completely in their absence that you forget they ever existed. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, it's discovering that the end of one story is just the beginning of a much better one. 5 years later, I'd be sitting in my London office reading an email from Jessica about her promotion to partner at her consulting firm, while reviewing expansion plans for Chun Industries' entry into the African renewable energy market. But that's a story for another day. Today's story ends with a woman who learned that being underestimated is only a disadvantage if you believe it yourself. And I'd stopped believing it the moment I answered Mrs. Chen's challenge in perfect Mandarin and watched her realize that the waitress she'd tried to humiliate was actually the consultant her family needed. Some lessons are worth 7 years of waiting tables to learn. Some victories are worth a lifetime of preparation. And some conversations change everything, especially when you have the perfect words ready in exactly the right language. Where are you watching from today? Thank you for joining me on this journey. Like and subscribe if my story reminded you that it's never too late to reclaim your power and rewrite your ending. The best chapters of your life might be the ones you haven't written yet. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters. Music.